On Thursday, the air quality around Spokane went from hazardous to very unhealthy. And then on Friday, it ticked up another notch from very unhealthy to just plain unhealthy. And everyone breathed a sigh of relief. Very unhealthy to unhealthy. Meanwhile, over 3,000 miles away in the Florida Keys, the curator of the Ernest Hemingway House is staying put. He and various employees have seen their fair share of hurricanes, and whether it's category 5 or 4 or 3, they're going to hunker down and face the music. Jesus, of course, talked about this kind of thing many moons ago when he mentioned a cloud rising in the west and the south wind blowing. He says, you can interpret the signs of the earth and sky. How is it that you can interpret this present age? And he called the crowds hypocrites because they couldn't interpret the dynamics we face interpersonally in the midst of the smoke and the wind and the rain. Let's face it, there are two really obvious conversation starters. These conversation starters never fail. One is the weather, and the other is work. And so when we're meeting and greeting people, even our closest relatives, we typically say something like, you know when it's supposed to rain again? Or we say, how's work going? But beneath the lull between Labor Day and the next wedding rehearsal, something is brewing. And it's not beer, Dan. It's not beer. Something is stirring. And it's not sugar in your coffee, Randy. What's brewing, according to the biblical passage that I read today, is something really peculiar. Isaiah calls it Babylon. And for our purposes today, as I'm sharing with you, Babylon is no longer just the ancient empire that we've talked about, but Babylon is a state of mind. It's a condition of the soul. And here's the thing that the prophet wants us to hear, right, as we start this busy schedule of September and October. Babylon has gone too far. Babylon has gone too far. Let me put it to you this way. I once encountered some rambunctious twins at a family reunion, and they were roughhousing at a campsite, and the parents every once in a while would glance over at these twin boys, 8 or 9 years old, and they'd say, boys will be boys, right? And you can imagine other parents, girls will be girls, right? You can even imagine transgender children will be transgender children. They'll be okay. But when one twin starts to bite another twin, when one twin takes out a stick and tries to hit the other twin over the head, those same parents, if they're decent parents, will intervene and say, you've gone too far. You've gone too far. I myself have a reputation for being a little tactless. I know it's hard to believe, right? Because you're probably familiar with lots of people that have been tactless. But I have a reputation for saying the wrong thing at the wrong time, for going too far. Sometimes I feel as if I'm saying only what other people are thinking, but not saying out loud. For example, there was a young woman in our praise team, very beautiful, and she and her husband were having their first child. She was a petite woman with a great singing voice, and in her 8th month, she was huge. She was huge. And you know how it is with pregnant women. Typically, even if you don't know her very well, sometimes you just feel like you have the right to go and just touch her stomach, right? I didn't do that, but this is what I did. It was a really sunny day, and we were in the middle of this big field. There were no trees around, and I noticed her protruding stomach cast this large shadow. And so I thought it would be funny if I laid down in the grass beneath her shadow and took advantage of the shade. And she said, "That is not complimentary." And I felt duly reprimanded. You see, I went too far. That's too far. And Babylon goes too far. You heard it in the text in chapter 47. You might have noticed how up into chapter 47, Isaiah portrays the ancient empires, all of them, right? Assyria, Babylon, and Persia, as doing God's work. This is common in the prophets. The prophets portray the nations as under God's control, under Yahweh's summons, and they're acting at God's behest. So, on that day, there will be a highway from Egypt to Assyria, claims Isaiah 19:23. And the Assyrian will come into Egypt, and the Egyptian into Assyria, and the Egyptians will worship with the Assyrians. On that day, Israel will be the third with Egypt and Assyria, a blessing in the midst of the earth, whom the Lord of hosts has blessed, saying, "Blessed be Egypt, my people, and Assyria, the work of my hands, and Israel, my heritage." This is a remarkable passage. But you see who's missing in it? Babylon. Babylon has gone too far. Babylon has exceeded the purposes, the reconciling purposes that Yahweh had staked out for them. And I'm here to say this morning that any community that exceeds God's reconciling purposes with its pride, with its hubris, will also be held in check. Babylon goes too far, and there's only one solution. It's in verse 1 of today's text. "Come down and sit in the dust, virgin daughter Babylon. Sit on the ground without a throne, daughter Chaldea." Now, I don't think I need to remind you that tomorrow is an anniversary. It's an anniversary of 9/11. And I remember living outside of Philadelphia, and it was a beautiful sunny day, blue sky. By the end of that day, there were images of people walking in dust and collapsing and sitting on curbs in dust. Very prominent people, people with briefcases, people with pinstripe suits, and their eyes were just glazed over with what had happened. Suddenly, their very important work, right, in finance and in business and in all kinds of important things, suddenly their very important work was demoted, was degraded. It was knocked off its pedestal, and they had to think about their lives differently. I'm wondering if that's not in play today. You guys know who Stephen Bannon is? Steve Bannon is the former cabinet member of the White House. He is the ubiquitous editor of Breitbart News, and he recently said something to Charlie Rose that needs to be held in check. The context for Bannon's remarks are the rescinding of the DACA order, by which about 800,000 people who were brought into the country as children could remain in the country and continue to live their lives with a sense of belonging and pride. That's the DACA order that was issued by President Barack Obama years ago. Anyway, as of last Tuesday, the Attorney General of the Justice Department announced the end of this compassionate way of dealing with the immigrant population. And when nearly all of the religious groups in the country denounced the change, Bannon portrayed their motivation like this. They need illegal aliens, he said, of the Roman Catholic Church. They need illegal aliens to fill the churches. They have an economic interest. They have an economic interest in unlimited immigration. Unlimited immigration is what will save the churches. Now, whether you buy into this cynicism or this economic idea, it is hard not to see Steve Bannon as standing in this long line of other xenophobic leaders from the Bible. For example, King Herod, remember this guy from our Christmas passages? King Herod, Quirinius, the governor of Syria, and Caesar Augustus, who once upon a time issued an order that all the world should be registered. Interesting. Bannon writes, or actually says in the interview, as much as I respect Cardinal Timothy Dolan and the bishops on doctrine, this is not doctrine, he said. This is not doctrine at all. I totally respect the Pope and I totally respect the Catholic bishops and cardinals on doctrine. This is not about doctrine. This is about the sovereignty of a nation. And in that regard, they're just one other guy with an opinion. Well, actually, no, Mr. Bannon, if you're watching. This is not another guy with an opinion. This is a biblical mandate. And part and parcel of the biblical mandate is that God is in command of the sovereign nations of the world. The sovereign nations of the world are not sovereign. They've been demoted. They've been degraded. Come down and sit in the dust, virgin daughter Babylon. Sit on the ground without a throne, for you shall no more be called tender and delicate. It's like this in every relationship. If we start off thinking we're doing something good, but that goodness turns into something that's prideful and arrogant and controlling, God will hold it in check. Babylon goes too far. A while ago, there was a mother who was a mother of a cheerleading candidate in Texas. And you know how in Texas they take their football very seriously, and they also take their cheerleaders seriously, right? Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders. Dan, you know who I'm talking about? Yeah, okay. And I'm picking on Dan today. And this mother wanted her daughter to be welcomed into the cheerleading squad in this particular high school. So you know what she did? She didn't just encourage her daughter and say, that will be okay, honey, if you try your best and you don't make it. She didn't say that. She took out a contract on the daughter's cheerleading competition. Yes, yeah, this is true. She actually arranged for someone to hurt and maim and perhaps kill her cheerleading competition, right? How far are we willing to go, right? How far is a mother who's looking out for her daughter willing to go? She's gone too far. Human beings are like this. We get in our heads something that's good, and we, like Babylon, go too far. Now, to add to this metaphor of Babylon going too far, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that Martin Luther, that great Protestant reformer, he wrote a book once upon a time called The Babylonian Captivity of the Church, in which he argued the church can go too far. And in the book, he reduces the number of sacraments from 7 to 2, right? Just baptism and the Lord's Supper. And he said that we shouldn't be using the sacraments to somehow control or manipulate people, to incentivize people to do good without God's blessing. He writes, those pious souls who do good to gain the kingdom of heaven not only will never succeed, but they must even be reckoned among the impious. And it is more important to guard them against good works than against sin. Check that out. Luther claims that presumably good people doing good deeds need to have their good works held in check. They're going too far with taking themselves and their own goodness seriously. They're not relying upon God to inform their goodness, to make it compassionate and sensitive. We can actually go too far with our own sense of prideful goodness. This is how one of my teachers described what's going on even today. Let's say, for example, this is God, right? And this thing here is God, right? And most people who are raised in the church, they consider themselves close to God, right? But if they take pride in their own individual goodness, it's as if they've turned their back on God. They may be close to God, seemingly, but they've turned their back on God. And as soon as they make steps, they start to walk away from God. Interestingly enough, there are people that are doubters, and they're far away from God. See how far they are? But when they turn around and face God, they begin to walk toward Him. Now, isn't it interesting that those people that are churched think they're so close to God, and they begin to interact with those who are far away coming toward God? I think something like that's happening, even around Origen. Walker Percy is a great American novelist, and he talked about hurricanes, and he also talked about this theory. He said that people often felt good in bad environments and felt bad in good environments. Let me say that again. He said people felt good in bad environments, like hurricanes, and bad in good environments, when we're all healthy and safe. And in one of his novels called The Last Gentleman, he remembers getting stuck in a diner with his old girlfriend during a hurricane. And they were sitting in the dust, he remembers, and they were very happy. They were very happy to be cleaning up the broken glass and taking care of one another. He writes, Midge no longer felt obliged to keep her face stiff. They were able to talk. It was the best of all when the hurricane's eye seemed the most ominous. It wasn't ominous. Everything was yellow and charged up with value. And the point he's trying to make, I think, the point of all this value, is that we need Babylon to be held in check. We need Mar-a-Lago to be held in check. We need Mar-a-Lago, Babylon, to sit in the dust. Sometimes I doubt your commitment to Sparkle Motion. Sometimes I doubt your commitment to Sparkle Motion. These are the words of Kitty Farmer, who appears in the 2001 film known as Donnie Darko. Has anyone ever seen Donnie Darko? She's a teacher and a parent in the middle school district, and she's the pillar in that community. She's the bridge between the school and the public. And Kitty Farmer is also the coach and the chaperone for a dance troupe of young, stressed out girls called Sparkle Motion. And when stuff happens in people's lives, she doesn't understand why they can't give their full commitment to Sparkle Motion. She'll say to the girls, "Failure is not an option." Really? This is a dance troupe. These are 7th grade girls. She says to the parents of the girls, sometimes I doubt your commitment to Sparkle Motion. You bet. Sparkle Motion needs to sit in the dust. This fall, if you ever feel like there's something you have to do, something you're obligated to do, and you feel so stressed about doing it, I wonder if you don't need to sit in the dust. I wonder if we don't need to have our pride held in check, our hubris held in check. The world will spin without us. Thanks be to God.